What this man did next will shatter your heart into a million pieces. A 67-year-old janitor brought his lunch to a stranger's hospital bed every single day for 3 months. But when the nurse finally whispered those 4 words to him, everything changed forever. Wait until you hear what she said, ladies and gentlemen. This story will prove that miracles do happen even in the darkest moments. What started as a simple act of kindness became the most incredible reunion you've ever heard, and I guarantee you are not prepared for this twist. But first, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like giving up? Like the universe had forgotten about you? Well, after you hear what happened to 67-year-old Robert Martinez, you'll never lose hope. Again, this man's story went from tragic to miraculous in just 4 words from a nurse, and those 4 words, they changed everything. It was a cold Tuesday morning in Chicago when Robert Martinez clocked in for another shift at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. For 15 years, he'd been the night janitor, invisible to most but essential to everyone. Robert was different from other janitors, though. While others rushed through their duties, Robert took time. He'd smile at patients, chat with lonely elderly folks, and somehow he made that sterile hospital feel a little more like home. But Robert carried a burden that would break most men. 22 years ago, his world collapsed when his daughter Sarah vanished without a trace. She was only 19, fresh out of high school, with dreams bigger than Chicago itself. The police searched for months. Private investigators drained his savings. But Sarah had simply disappeared, like she never existed. Then, on March 15th, everything changed. Robert was mopping the ICU when he noticed room 314. Inside lay a woman mid-40s, unconscious, alone. No visitors, no flowers, no cards. The nurses whispered that she'd been there for 6 weeks. Car accident, coma, no identification. No family had claimed her. She was forgotten. Something about her reminded Robert of his Sarah. Maybe it was her auburn hair or the way her hands were positioned, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this woman shouldn't be alone. So Robert made a decision that would change 2 lives forever. The next day, he brought his lunch, a simple ham sandwich and apple, and ate it in room 314, talking to the unconscious woman like she was an old friend. Day after day, Robert returned. He'd tell her about his shift, about the funny things patients said, about the weather. He'd read her newspaper articles, described the sunrise from her window. You know, he'd whisper, my daughter would be about your age now. I like to think someone would sit with her if she needed it. Weeks turned into months. Other staff members thought Robert was eccentric, but they saw something beautiful in his dedication. This janitor, earning barely above minimum wage, had adopted a stranger. Then something incredible started happening. The woman's vitals began improving. Her brain activity increased. The doctors couldn't explain it, but she was fighting her way back to consciousness. But here's where it gets strange. The woman started mumbling in her sleep, just fragments of words, but Robert swore he recognized something familiar in her voice. On June 3rd, exactly 82 days after Robert's first visit, the impossible happened. As Robert unwrapped his usual ham sandwich, the woman's eyes fluttered open. For the first time, she looked around, confused, disoriented. But when her gaze fell on Robert, something extraordinary happened. A single tear rolled down her cheek. Who are you? She whispered in a voice rusty from months of silence. Robert smiled, that gentle smile he'd perfected over 15 years of janitorial work on. Robert, I've been keeping you company. You don't have to be alone anymore. But then she said something that stopped Robert's heart. You smell like my father's cologne, Old Spice. And Hope. The woman remembered her name, Sarah Mitchell. But everything else gone. Amnesia had stolen 22 years of her life. She remembered being 19, living in Chicago, but nothing after that. As days passed, Robert noticed strange coincidences. Sarah hummed the same lullaby Robert used to sing to his daughter. She had the same nervous habit of twisting her hair when thinking she loved ham sandwiches just like his Sarah. But Robert had learned not to hope. 22 years of searching had taught him that sometimes coincidences are just cruel tricks of the universe. Nurse Patricia Williams had worked the ICU for 30 years. She'd seen everything, but she noticed something about Robert and Sarah that others missed. The way Sarah's vitals calmed when Robert spoke, how her sleep patterns matched his visit schedule. Patricia started asking questions. She learned about Robert's missing daughter. She studied Sarah's medical records, her scars, her birthmarks. And then she made a phone call that would change everything. Robert, Patricia said, one evening, I know this sounds crazy, but would you be willing to do DNA test. Robert's hands shook. 22 years of false hopes had nearly destroyed him. I can't go through that again, he whispered. But what if? Patricia pressed gently. What if? Your lunch breaks, your stories, your love. What if they brought your daughter back to you? With trembling hands, Robert agreed. The test was simple, a cheek swab from both him and Sarah, but the wait, those 72 hours, felt like 72 years. Meanwhile, Sarah was recovering rapidly. She'd started walking, talking more, even laughing at Robert's stories about difficult patients, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Robert was more than just a kind stranger. On a sunny Thursday morning, Patricia called Robert into her office. In her hands were 2 sealed envelopes. The DNA results, Robert, she said softly. Before we open these, I want you to know that regardless of what they say, what you've done for Sarah is beautiful. You've given a lost soul hope. But just as Patricia was about to open the envelope, Sarah appeared in the doorway. She'd been looking for Robert. Their daily lunch was in 5 minutes, and she'd grown to depend on their routine. I interrupting something? Sarah asked, noticing the tension in the room. Patricia looked at Robert, then at Sarah. Actually, you're exactly where you need to be. With hands that had cleaned hospital floors for 15 years, Robert opened the first envelope. His eyes scanned the technical jargon, looking for the only number that mattered: 9,997% probability of paternal match. The paper fell from Robert's hands like autumn leaves. 22 years of searching, 22 years of wondering, 22 years of hope and heartbreak. That's when Patricia, tears streaming down her face, walked over to Robert and whispered those 4 words that changed everything. Sir, that's your daughter. The room fell silent except for the sound of Robert's knees hitting the floor. Sarah, still confused but feeling something deep and primal, reached out to touch this man who had sat with her for 3 months. And then, like a dam bursting, Sarah's memories came flooding back. Not all of them, but enough. The cologne, the lullabies, the way he held his sandwich. This wasn't just any janitor, this was her daddy. Through tears and fragmented memories, Sarah's story emerged. At 19, she'd left Chicago chasing a modeling dream in Los Angeles. But dreams turned to nightmares when she fell into the wrong crowd. Addiction, abusive relationships, a stolen identity. For 22 years, Sarah Mitchell lived as someone else, too ashamed to contact the father she'd left behind. The car accident that put her in the coma. She'd finally gotten clean, finally found the courage to come home to Chicago. She was driving to Northwestern Memorial Hospital, where she somehow knew her father worked, when a drunk driver changed everything. She'd been unconscious in the very hospital where her father worked for 15 years, and somehow, someway, love had guided him to her bedside. What happened next proves that love truly is the most powerful medicine. With Robert by her side every day, Sarah's recovery accelerated beyond medical explanation. They started rebuilding their relationship, one lunch at a time. Robert brought photo albums sharing 22 years of memories Sarah had missed. Birthdays he'd celebrated alone, Christmases with an empty chair. Daddy, Sarah whispered one afternoon, I'm so sorry I left. I'm sorry I put you through hell. Robert just held her hand and said, Baby girl, you came back. That's all that matters now. Their story spread through the hospital like wildfire. Staff members who'd worked with Robert for years saw him in a new light. This quiet janitor had never stopped being a father, even when he had no child to father. When a local news station picked up their story, America fell in love with Robert and Sarah Martinez. Here was proof that miracles still happen, that love conquers all, that sometimes the universe conspires to heal broken hearts. I always knew she was alive, Robert told reporters. A father knows. I cleaned these floors for 15 years, never knowing I was walking past my daughter's future room thousands of times. Their story inspired others. Missing person cases were reopened. Families separated by addiction and shame found the courage to reconnect. Hospital staff began paying more attention to unclaimed patients. But for Robert and Sarah, the media attention was secondary. They had found each other, and that was enough. 6 months later, Sarah was fully recovered physically. Emotionally, she and Robert were healing together, building a relationship that addiction and time had nearly destroyed. Robert retired from janitorial work and became a hospital volunteer, specializing in sitting with unclaimed patients. Everyone deserves someone became his motto. Sarah became an addiction counselor, using her story to help others find their way back to family. It's never too late to come home, she tells her clients, and every single day at exactly 12:30 p.m., Robert and Sarah have lunch together, sometimes at home, sometimes at the hospital, but always together, the room where they reunited. Room 314 now has a small plaque, where love guided a father to his daughter, and miracles prove that hope never dies, but the most beautiful moment came. 8 months later, Sarah had met someone, a fellow addiction counselor named Michael. When she got engaged, there was only one person she wanted to walk her down the aisle. Daddy, she said, I know I missed 22 years of your life, but would you give me away, Robert? This man who had cleaned hospital floors while his heart broke? Every day finally got to be the father he'd always remained in his heart on. A beautiful Chicago morning, Robert Martinez, wearing his first tuxedo at age 68, walked his daughter down the aisle. Not a dry eye in the house. 22 years ago, I thought. I lost my daughter, Robert said in his Father of the Bride speech. But I learned something: love doesn't disappear, it waits, it hopes. And sometimes it performs miracles in hospital rooms. Robert and Sarah's story teaches us that miracles aren't always dramatic. Sometimes they're as simple as showing up, as simple as sharing your lunch with someone who needs to know they're not alone. For 82 days, Robert chose love over indifference. He chose hope over despair. He chose to see the human being behind the medical chart. His simple act of eating lunch with a stranger saved 2 lives. Sarah's and his own, because Robert had been dying too slowly for 22 years, dying of a broken heart. When we serve others, we serve ourselves. When we refuse to let someone suffer alone, we heal our own loneliness. Today, 3 years later, Robert and Sarah are inseparable. They run a foundation called Room 314 that provides companionship for unclaimed hospital patients across the country. They've trained over 500 volunteers in 12 states. They've sat with more than 2,000 patients, and they've facilitated 37 family reunions. Every person in every hospital bed is someone's child. Robert says no one should face their darkest moment alone, but their greatest achievement. Sarah is now 3 years sober, happily married, and expecting her first child. Robert is finally going to be a grandfather. But here's the detail that will blow your mind, the one I saved for last. That first day, Robert decided to eat lunch in room 314. It wasn't random. The hospital's employee records show that for 15 years, Robert had cleaned every floor except the ICU. He'd never worked that floor, never had reason to be there. On March 15th, the regular ICU janitor called in sick. Robert was asked to cover out of 847 shifts in 15 years. He'd never been assigned the ICU, never. Sarah had been unconscious for 6 weeks when Robert first saw her. Medical records show that if she'd gone one more week without stimulation, without human connection, the brain damage would have been irreversible. Coincidence? Maybe. Miracle? Definitely. Sometimes the universe moves people exactly where they need to be, exactly when they need to be there. So I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to really think about it. Who in your life needs someone to bring them lunch? Who needs to know they're not forgotten? Maybe it's a patient in a local hospital. Maybe it's an elderly neighbor. Maybe it's someone in your own family who's struggling with addiction, shame, or isolation. Robert didn't need special training or vast resources. He just needed to show up with a ham sandwich and an open heart. What if your simple act of kindness became someone's miracle? What if your lunch break changed 2 lives forever? Don't wait. Don't assume someone else will do it. Don't think it won't make a difference. Robert Martinez, a man who spent 15 years cleaning hospital floors, has this message for you. Love doesn't give up. Love doesn't stop looking. Love doesn't accept defeat. And Sarah has this to say: sometimes we get lost. Sometimes we think we've gone too far to come home. But someone is always waiting for us, hoping for us, believing in us. Their story proves that it's never too late for a miracle. It's never too late to come home. It's never too late to be the answer to someone's prayer. A janitor brought his lunch to a stranger's bedside. A daughter found her way home. A family was restored, and 2 broken hearts were made whole in a world that often feels cold and disconnected. Robert and Sarah Martinez remind us that love is still the most powerful force in the universe. And sometimes miracles come disguised as ham sandwiches and hope. If the story moved you, if it gave you hope, if it reminded you that miracles are real, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, because somewhere someone needs to hear that they're not forgotten. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories that prove love wins that family matters, that hope never dies. Make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. Tell me in the comments, what would you do if you discovered your daily act of kindness was actually saving your own family member? How far would you go to bring someone home? Until next time, remember, you never know when you might be someone's miracle. You never know when your simple act of love might change everything. This is your reminder that in a world full of strangers, we're all family. And sometimes love finds a way, but before you go, I need to ask you for something. If this story touched your heart, if it made you believe in miracles again, if it reminded you that love never gives up, please hit that subscribe button right now, because here's the thing, stories like Robert and Sarah's happen every single day, but most people never hear about them. I spend countless hours researching, investigating, and bringing you these incredible true stories that prove humanity is still beautiful.